Greetings, Culture Warriors. This is Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Today, we're going to go take a look at a company that you may be familiar with. You may even have their product, a very popular game. This is from the Business Insider, and the headline is, "The co-founder of Cards Against Humanity has resigned from the company after allegations arose he fostered a sexist and racist culture." This is by Paige Lesky. One of the co-founders of Cards Against Humanity, which boasts itself as a game for horrible people, has resigned from the company after several former workers alleged he fostered a toxic workplace that hurt employees of colors and the LGBTQ community. Cards Against Humanity said in a statement Tuesday that Max Temkin, the co-founder who ran operations in the Chicago office, had stepped down from his position earlier this month. Temkin's departure and CAH's announcement follows weeks of former employees sharing stories on social media and an extensive expose Polygon published Tuesday containing even more allegations. CAH, both as a card gaming company, has prided itself on a subversive, no punches held attitude. Beyond the card game, well known as an explicit version of the game Apples to Apples, the company has engaged in wild performative stunts. Black Friday in particular has been a day for those pranks. In 2016, people paid more than $100,000 for CAH to dig a hole. For last year's stunt, CAH said it would fire participating employees if they lost a card writing competition against an AI. The writers ended up winning. Combined with its success as a multi-million-dollar company, CAH employees reportedly feared speaking up out about problematic behavior over fear of retaliation from leadership, Polygon reports. Let me just point out that any of the errors here in grammar are in the original article. I am reading it as it is written. This is yet another example of how poorly edited internet content is. More than 20 former employees told Polygon about multiple incidents where concerns and suggestions from people of color were blatantly dismissed. Black employees were often tasked with explaining to their coworkers why certain cards were offensive, according to Polygon. In one case, head writers reportedly wanted to add a card to the game containing a racial slur toward black people. Additionally, former employees said CAH lacked a human resources department, a fact that became an open joke in the office. The company said in Tuesday's statement had appointed a dedicated HR contractor in January 2019. That's how that sentence is actually written. The company said in Tuesday's statement had appointed a dedicated HR contractor in January 2019. The CAH statement posted to the company's website is lengthy. The company goes through each of Polygon's allegations one by one, defending its actions in some situations and acknowledging a history of making a lot of mistakes. In the Polygon piece, employees named Temkin specifically as a harbinger of the toxic culture at CAH. This isn't the first time Temkin has faced accusations of problematic behavior. In 2014, a woman alleged Temkin sexually assaulted her while they were both college students. At the time, Temkin responded that the allegations were totally, patently false. CAH said that Temkin stepped down from his role on June 9th, although he remains a 1/8 shareholder in the company. Cards Against Humanity is only one of the companies that have recently faced allegations of purporting sexist and racist company cultures. A slew of stories have emerged from former and current employees at fitness brands like CrossFit and Adidas, tech companies such as Snapchat and Pinterest, media publishers such as Refinery29 and Bon Appetit, and dozens of other businesses. Okay, so this is an interesting situation. We are continuing to see what has been described as cancel culture. What cancel culture means is that if you do not hold the value and epitomize the values of the so-called social justice warriors of the left, the ideological left, then They will expose you. They will dig into your past and find anything in your past that seems inconsistent with those values. They will first demand an apology from you, a public apology of the sort that Joseph Stalin made famous in the show trials in the Soviet Union in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then, after you have made your confession and your abject apology, they will still seek to take away your job, your livelihood. If you're a famous person, they will seek to shun you, throw you down the memory hole as though you never existed, as in George Orwell's 1984. They will attempt to obliterate you. And this is another example of cancel culture trying to collect a scalp. And indeed, collecting a scalp. So this person was the co-founder of Cards Against Humanity. Cards Against Humanity is a card game, an adult card game. It is known for its very risque sense of humor. That is what the fun associated with the game hinges upon. And it's been extremely popular as an adult party game. So it's no surprise that the person who comes up with this game originally, and then who leads the company which produces it, and the game really consists of a series of cards which are juxtaposed to present kind of creative phrases, and often, quite offensive phrases, depending on which, where your particular shibboleths may reside. And so you can imagine that the person who would come up with such a thing is probably not very politically correct. Temkin may be a leftist. Probably highly likely that he is. This seems to be something that you would expect more from a dedicated leftist than from someone from a more right-wing or conservative background. And yet, as so many of them do in their personal interactions, they require a freedom of speech that they are generally unwilling to grant or acknowledge in others. And this is why so many of them wind up getting thrown under the bus when the social justice warrior mob requires another sacrifice to keep entertained. They had no HR department. Well, that's probably not surprising either. A lot of these companies that are allegedly woke generally dislike having someone around to tell them they can't do what they want to do. In this case, the toxic culture that is being derided obviously stems straight from leadership. One of the principles I lay out in the book is that culture comes from leadership. That's where it originates. And in this case, this CEO, this co-founder, clearly preferred a culture which was more freewheeling than an HR function was likely to tolerate. It would have to be a unique HR function indeed to ignore all the potential pitfalls these days with having such a culture in the workplace. It was a company that embraced a spirit of fun, even risque fun. And that's ultimately what did in their co-founder. So the expression, hoist on your own petard, comes to mind here, where the hypocrisy kind of inherent in this kind of enterprise was just not sustainable over the long haul. They had to come for him eventually. And the company probably got to a point where they're comfortable enough and enough money's flowing in that now it's time for the Parasites, who had nothing at all to do with it, didn't found it, didn't nurture it, didn't do much, but they're hanging around and drawing a paycheck from it. It's come time for them to make their move and take control over it. In the process, what will happen, as sure as the sun rising in the morning, is they will evaluate the game's content, which has made it as popular as it is. They will water it down ideologically and make it better suit the SJW beliefs of the triumphant new leadership. And in changing the game, they will make it less popular. You can expect that there will probably be an Orange Man bad aspect of the cards that has not hitherto been a facet of it. That will undoubtedly alienate half the country and take with it half the market that the current game enjoys. This is what has happened in so many industries. I have been a lifelong collector of comic books. Comic books in the 70s, when I started collecting them, were a very different animal. Many of them were not pitched for children any longer, but rather for college-age adults, so they had a little more sophistication in the stories than the Golden Age and Silver Age comics did. But they were generally bereft of overt politics. They were escapist vehicles. Yes, every now and then you would have an analogy, or you would have something that would touch on a little bit too much on the nose sometimes, current events. But those were rare. Month over month over month, you could find plenty of content where contemporary politics didn't really factor in. This is what made comics timeless. It allowed for their appeal to be lasting and to be broad, to be embraced by a wide variety of people from different cultures. Over time, the comics industry became smaller, and when it got small enough, it was completely taken over by the so-called social justice warriors. For most of its history, the comic book industry was headquartered in New York City. And you had the major companies all based out of New York. But despite it being based in New York City, it had a broader view than it does now, with so much of the industry actually being based out of the leftist bastion of Antifa's home, Portland, Oregon. That's where many of the major creators today live. And they've taken their leftist ideology and driven it relentlessly through their stories. And the impact has been people like me have stopped collecting new comics. This has happened in fan favorite franchises as well. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was tremendously successful early on, began to wane as social justice warrior politics were increasingly injected into the product. The same thing happened with Star Wars. The same thing happened with Star Trek. And as a result, alienating so much of the fan base, which was hardly in either case could be considered to be a bastion of right-wing conservatism. But they've alienated enough of the fans with this political nonsense that those franchises are now on life support. The same thing has happened to Doctor Who. I haven't watched Doctor Who since the current Doctor took over, because that actress and the showrunner for the show has made very clear that it is now a left-wing ideological show. And everything has been subordinated to that, including the past history of a entertainment vehicle which has gone back to the mid-60s. So the same thing is going to happen with this game, as has happened to so many other vehicles. There's a current controversy right now over a video game, The Last of Us Part 2, where the same thing has happened. And again, this isn't the only game where this has happened. This is just the latest one. But a game which was very highly regarded in its first incarnation, was the flagship game, really, of the PlayStation console. And now it has been handed over to the tender mercies of some social justice warriors who have promptly injected it with all manner of politics and thus alienated a good portion of the game's audience. It's a strange way to be successful in business. But for whatever reason, so many are ignoring the advice that you get woke, you go broke. And they continue to proceed on this path of propaganda and ideological conformity. I don't know anything about the charges, really, the truth of them against Temkin. I don't really suspect that Temkin would be somebody that I could sit down and have dinner with or a beer with and particularly enjoy myself. However, it does seem a little bit excessive to drive him out of the company he founded for following the values that were inherent in that company since day one. I don't have to agree with those values, but kind of clearly they've been there. And to the extent that the actual practices and behaviors were consistent with law, you would think that would be within kind of the tolerable range for companies of this sort. You know, toy manufacturers, game manufacturers, people who make content which, while it may be geared towards an 18 and over crowd, is still juvenile. I don't know what else you expect from the culture at those companies, really. Is it any surprise that Facebook is a big cauldron of drama? That's what their whole product is drama. Is it any surprise that some of these companies where they pride themselves on sitting in bean bags as 30-year-olds, is it any surprise that their cultures tend to be immature and a bit like high school extended? I don't think so. So again, not passing judgment on the values. It seems like this was a case where the culture changed and the co-founder didn't change with it in sufficient time to preserve his own role within the company that he founded. Because remember, little jokes and fun time and this kind of juvenile enterprise, these things come and go. But culture is everything. Have a great day.